What a great session. Thank you, Your Excellencies, Mr. Xi Ningning and Asman, for the powerhouse panel discussion. For our next session, the panellists will look about the global and regional supply chain transformation in COVID-19 new normal and how the firms are adapting to it. Please welcome our panel members. Partner, Paul Chiar Associates, Ms. Esther Hoare. General Counsel, Ninja Van Group, Mr. Zach Queck. Chief Strategy Officer, Huawei Enterprise, Mr. Ivan Lowe. Please join me in welcoming our panel moderator, Senior Partner at V&A, Ms. Franchette Acosta.
Good morning to all. Thank you for joining us today at the panel session on supply chain in Asia, trends and challenges. COVID-19 has emphasized for all of us the pervasiveness of the supply chain in our daily lives. The food we eat, the medicines we need to take, and our day-to-day needs are all manufactured and delivered to us through a supply chain most of us don't even see. But we have felt disruption at many levels in the recent years. Raw materials have become scarce, factories closed, transportation has become restricted, and workers less mobile. Today, we seek to discuss what challenges companies have faced in the last year and a half and how they have overcome these. By the end of the session, we would have gained valuable insights from our speakers on best practices in building a more resilient supply chain. But before we begin our discussion and before I introduce the esteemed members of our panel, we would like to get the pulse of the audience relating to the topic. So we have some polling questions that will be shown on screen. Please scan the QR code to answer the polling questions. And just to go through the questions very quickly with you, what are the global supply chain thematics which will be important during the new normal? Multiple selection is possible. First, secured food chain and logistics. Second, fast-moving consumer goods, supply chain resilience. And third, reverse logistics and value-added services. Fourth, reducing carbon footprint through green logistics. Leveraging on FTA and RCEP, which reduce tariffs. And reconstructing supply chain from country of origins, US and China, to lower tariffs region. So please make your choice. It will take a while for the poll to come back. And in the meantime, I would like to introduce to the audience our three panelists, all of whom are experts in their chosen field. We have Esther Thor, who is a partner at Paul Chiar Associates. Esther is an expert in intellectual property rights in Malaysia. She's also experienced in the field of information, technology, communication, and multimedia. Esther has a well-established practice representing among the largest international and local businesses before the courts of Malaysia. Good morning, Esther.
Good morning, Franchette.
Yes. And we also have Zach Queck, who is Ninja Van's General Counsel. Ninja Van Group is Southeast Asia's leading e-commerce logistics provider. As General Counsel, Zach is responsible for legal and regulatory risks management, fundraising processes, and other strategic initiatives across the Ninja Van Group. Zach heads legal teams in 6 Southeast Asian countries. We also have with us Ivan Lowe, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of Huawei Enterprise. Ivan is responsible for developing, communicating, and executing Huawei's sustaining corporate strategic objectives in Singapore. And I'm Franchette. I'm a partner in Villaraza and Angco law firm based in Manila. I'll be your moderator this morning. So let's see if we have the results of the poll. So on your screens are the results of the poll. Let me just, okay. So most of the audience answered 7, secured food chain and logistics. And the least chosen alternative is the revenue, logistics, and value-added services. So there we have for you the results of the poll. So we can now begin. Ivan, can we share with us your thoughts on how COVID-19 has impacted global and regional supply chains? How have companies with global or regional presence navigated these challenges, and how much of their resilience has been impacted by policy?
Okay, sure. First of all, very good morning. Very happy to be here to share with you about my thoughts and some of the challenge that we face about supply chain, right? So maybe to address your questions, let me just articulate in a couple of portions, right? First of all, as we all know, a natural reaction to the pandemic, right, is actually has been for the companies to cut on their spending, right? So we have seen that the investment in digital transformation has remained rather stagnant over many parts of 2020 after many years of growth, right? And that is exactly the opposite of what we should be expecting. Because today, many enterprises, they are leveraging on their legacy system. As a result, not all the enterprise or the economies has been able to transform at the same pace. Economies which has a more mature digital infrastructure, they are be able to respond better or faster with the pandemic. So, we can expect the future supply chain direction to move from cost focus to basically balancing between stability and efficiency as two of the key factors. Many enterprises will be exploring to move, to countries which has more stable supply chain solutions. And for enterprise that depends on global supply chains, likely they may have to build some manufacturing plant on their own within the country for the long-term solutions. But regardless, there's going to be a big change in the supply chain model. You will see more enterprises taking up the journey for the supply chain digital transformation. Based on one of the survey that I read recently, in the US itself, more than 85% of the enterprise, they have already built an online purchase model. And by 2025, more than 80% of the US enterprise, their so-called B2B business model, basically they will change into a digital channel, right? So what are the changes that we can see in the consumer business, the consumer behavior? Where in the past, I used to talk to a lot of CTO, and now we have a lot of CDO, right? So in the past, usually when I talk to them, they will tell me that, when they need to go into some digital transformation projects, they need to justify based on the ROI of this investment to the CEO. But with the COVID itself, actually, it made their justification a lot easier. So I always joke to say that, COVID is actually the main CTO for digital transformation, right? So, with COVID, definitely, we all seen that there's a lot of online shopping, online business, and this is at the expense of the main key point or the main pain point that the enterprise is facing, which is the shortage of manpower all over the place. Factories are closed, people need to work from home, foreign workers cannot come into certain countries. These are all the challenges that we face. So I would expect that, many of the consumer or even the enterprise, they will have a more realistic expectation, especially on the delivery timeline. Say, I'll give you an example. In the past, I used to run a PC business, right? So when enterprise, they want to order, a computer, notebook on the quantity of like 10,000, 20,000, in the regions, for example, they used to throw a tender with many specs. For example, the model cannot be more than 2.9 kg, cannot be how many USB ports, etc. Today, if you look at it, any supplier has the goods, you better take it, because otherwise you got to wait. All the things about the good to have, what's the difference between 2.9 kg and 2.8 kg, all this good to have is no longer the key factors, because the supply is limited everywhere, So as a result, what it actually create all all the challenges, you also give them the opportunity to transform. According to Gartner, more than 50% of the organizations, they have not yet started to build a roadmap for supply chain digital transformation. And more than 30% of the company, they're still depending on all the Excel spreadsheet. Another 30% depending on all the ad hoc reports. And 20% they have moved to some kind of BI dashboard and trends analytics. 15% into predictive and prescriptive analytics. Only 5% into AI and automation. So you can see that the pickup rate, there's a lot of room to improve. And also 70% of these supply chain leaders has feedback that all their smart manufacturing efforts are not running parallel and not integrated to the existing system. So these are all the challenges that we face. So we expect that in the future, the 4 key aspects of digital transformation in supply chain that most companies will go into will include digital planning, digital supply, digital manufacturing, and digital logistics. You will also see that there's a strong pickup rate on the use of chatbot, drones, robots, etc. So on the next part of the question, you also ask, how a company like Huawei is also, managing all these challenges. Definitely Huawei is a company that we help our customer in their digital transformation journey. Definitely we have to have some solutions during this pandemic itself, right? So we have identified what are the key values that in digital transformation into 4 key aspects. First of all, digital marketing, digital transaction, digital supply, and digital office. So when the pandemic first kicked in, we moved all our physical events into virtual. So for example, we have a yearly so-called MWC conference in Barcelona. In fact, even myself, I've already put the air ticket, the hotel in 2020, but the whole thing has to cancel. So we moved it virtually immediately, and some of my senior executives have told me that they are not able to meet 4 CEOs for 3 different regions within 1 day. This was not possible in the past. And the total the travel expense for Huawei came down significantly because there's no more traveling, but our business grew by 11% last year. And that was not expected as well. So you can see that the power of digital marketing is very strong. The other example, is the digital procurement and the digital supply. In the past, when customer place the order, we have to supply. Today, although it's still the same, but any product lines, there's a risk that it may get discontinued because certain component in the supply chain is no longer available. So today, what we need to do is we need to study into a more comprehensive relationship between the supplier data, the material, and the asset data. So as a result, we have started to launch a full digital service into our supply chains, and the efficiency has improved significantly. In any case, Huawei, we have started, since many years ago, so-called a multi-path and multi-source procurement strategies, whereby we are no longer reliant on the single country or supplier. We have found all the alternative solutions or technology to replace any key components, and there's little dependency on a single procurement route. So, how much of this challenge can be addressed by the so-called policies? Definitely government policies, they play a key role in developing the advanced sectors. Singapore has implemented an AI strategy to improve its innovative capabilities. As it ramps up its 5G, deployment over half the islands within the next few years, I strongly believe that Singapore, the latest AI strategy, has all the right ingredients to ensure that Singapore can become one of the strong AI clusters. We are also, prioritize the AI strategies in 5 key areas. Basically, the housing, the security, education, healthcare, and logistics. So we are also developing more than 25,000 professionals in AI from the government. So it is therefore necessary to deploy a regulatory framework, especially around data protection, AI ethics, as well as the capital investment for startups. You can expect that the future, AI will play a very big portion of it, and many decisions will be made by AI. AI is all about learning. The more you learn, the more you're able to make the right decision. But when AI is making all the key critical decisions, can you really trust AI to make the decision for you? That's the right question. That's the question. Who is going to control the AI decision? Who is going to audit the AI decision? And the learning process. All this will need government to have certain kind of policies. You can expect this policy to be ready in the future regarding data protection and AI ethics, right? So I think that's all I have to share for the first portion.
Thank you, Ivan. Zach, please tell us about Ninja Van's experience in the past month.
Thank you, Franchet. So, of course, logistics is in the heart of what NinjaVan does. And also to follow on in terms of what Ivan has shared, with regards to what we are going to be doing for the broader community in Southeast Asia, it's really, speaks to the heart of what the posters have actually responded to. So they say that security in terms of logistics, supply chain is what they're most concerned with. And I think with this COVID-19, what is really affected is service level. Time to get goods from point A to point B is taking a lot more time. And there's not just that more time is taken, there's also more uncertainty in terms of how long it takes. And this challenges and uncertainty is largely because, well, one, as also Ivan has pointed out, there's less manpower because either staff are ill or you can actually have less staff available within your warehouses, your working premises. And this is the policies taken by many Southeast Asian countries. And the COVID measures, safe distancing measures, etc., these are also aspects that affects productivity. They may be lower. It takes time for people to get used to working at full productivity in light of COVID measures. And then also with the various lockdowns and the various travel policies and inter-provincial travel policies also makes it a lot longer for goods to get from point A to point B. And with the various changes in rules or lockdowns, etc., it also makes it uncertain in terms of whether goods can get from A to B as well. And the main impact is what? Is really going to be increase in the cost of route haul and air freight. And these have increased and are fluctuating. And I think what you see is that a lot of the freight forwarders have introduced surcharge that they can impose onto their customers whenever there is any upstream supply cost increase. And this is not good for customers, of course. And the longer time taken from goods to move from point A to point B, also means that logistic companies also don't know how long goods will actually arrive at the destination. And all this uncertainty will disrupt the operations of many of the customers and also consumers across the region. And all this is magnified because of COVID, because what we see is that e-commerce has become a lot more popular. You see the shift from brick-to-mortar store to e-commerce. And also more people are buying online as opposed to going to brick-to-mortar stores. And for this, all the industry players in logistics need to boost their capacity. And the first few months of the pandemic is the worst for all logistics players because within a short period of time, they have to adjust to the new normal in terms of much higher demand, and the new normal in that there's uncertainty in terms of when goods will arrive from point A to point B, and the new normal will be prices are going to be fluctuating across the supply chain for your freight forwarders, for your customs agents, etc. But NinjaVan and also like other companies that are in this industry have responded very quickly. And we just have to be very nimble in terms of how we react to lockdowns. We have to also be very nimble when it comes to pricing. To a certain extent, logistics players will be absorbing quite a bit of the price increase. But there are a few things that can actually help to mitigate this kind of cost and logistics services impact that I've mentioned. So one, working closely with regulators help a lot. Maybe let me explain a bit further. So some of the Southeast Asia countries, as we know, they impose inter-provincial or rather cross-provincial travel restrictions, movement limits. So working with regulators gives us a few advantages, at least from the experience of, say, NinjaVan. For us, being very close to the regulator allows us to, get way in advance notice of when any lockdown is going to be imposed. So there'll be, at least in one case of one Southeast Asia country, we knew about any sort of lockdown a few days in advance from what the government is going to announce. And this allows us to boost capacity and also allow us to deal with potential, or rather to apply for approvals that we need to actually cross provincial lines. And when I say being close to regulators, it also means that we have to be very proactive and we have to be close to them. And that also maybe also entails us communicating via WhatsApp. And at least in the case of this Southeast Asian country, we're communicating very closely, even in the wee hours, over WhatsApp. And when we gotten the approval letters to travel across provincial lines, it was also issued to us over WhatsApp. And it's really the close collaboration required with regulators to actually ensure that For us, once the lockdown actually happened, we have the necessary papers so that our drivers can go across provincial lines. And another aspect in terms of what local regulations, governmental regulations can help to actually resolve service level issues will be that, when it comes to an effective and proper enforcement of safe distancing measures and also the rollout of the vaccination program across all the Southeast Asia countries, these are important as well. I know that maybe a lot of people, or rather work from home is the mantra nowadays. A lot of people assume that yes, any work can be done from home, but unfortunately for the tens of thousands of colleagues I have across the region, they have to be in the warehouse, they have to be on the road, they have to be at home to deliver the parcel to you. And it is important that we actually follow or rather the government will need to impose and to implement the safe distancing measures, and for us as citizens, we need to follow it properly, sincerely, and this will actually help to manage the pandemic in a much better way. And the vaccination program will actually be effective to make sure that if we actually got COVID-19, we are not going to be very sick, and also help to reduce the number of deaths. And with this, more and more of us can actually go back to the workplace. And when we go back to the workplace, our colleagues, not just in NinjaVan but across the industry as well, we can actually fulfill the kind of service level that the consumers expect, that our corporate customers expect. And which is why I say in terms of government regulations, the proper and effective implementation of it will really help to get logistics supply chain to become more robust. Thanks a lot, Franchette.
Thank you, Ivan. We know that laws and regulations play a very important role in corporate life and business. Esther, can you share with us whether in this challenging environment you've seen whether compliance with regulations such as data privacy, labor laws, have become a greater challenge for logistic companies or other companies? Has COVID-19 resulted in more contractual breaches? And how do you think these risks are mitigated?
Thank you, Franchette. So in particular to PDPA or personal data, so it itself not just applicable to logistic companies, but overall companies across the region. So personal data itself is sensitive. So for example, the name, the national identity, your personal contact details, all are deemed sensitive data before COVID. But after the COVID hits, it becomes a requirement or imposed by the government onto the companies to take down this sensitive data on a daily basis, not just on their employees, but also contractors, visitors that they come across. So not just that they have to take down this sensitive data, they have to keep these records as well for compliance purposes. So how long they have to keep this data? It could be kept for at least 1 year for now, because we do not know how long the pandemic will last. So for a year, anything can happen to the data. For example, you may just, lost the logbook, and then it may expose to any other third party to exploit it. So there are safety measures that imply or impose on the companies to how to keeping this sensitive data, and require companies to report this data or disclose this data to the relevant authority in the event that there are any positive cases or any symptoms that they found out within the company or when whoever that they came across. So not just that, even travel history will have to be taken account or recorded by the companies for the past 7 days or for the past 14 days where these employees or contractors or visitors have visited. So all this data has become essential, essential to the companies to keep record and then keep them safe in the event there is a need by the relevant authority to disclose them. Not just on compliance purposes, even risk management, they have to come across and take into consideration on how they manage the risk assessment. So not just risk and compliance regulations, even labor, even employment law has been developed throughout the past 1 year. You know, there are so many questions being asked from employers, employees as to how are this working from home works? What about their annual leaves? What about their payment? Everything will be sorted out within the companies, or are they being forced to work from home if they do not want to? So all these questions have been, you know, burst out during the COVID situation. So the government in Malaysia has issued a lot of regulations, a lot of policies. I wouldn't say it's a binding policy, but they are used as a guideline to help these employers and employees in answering these questions. So one of it will be the safety and health of the employees. So this is one of the important criteria that the employers must deploy in their companies in order to ensure that the employees are properly protected. Not just, and even now, Malaysia government actually imposed to the employer to have self-test kits in their companies. So they have to test their employees every 2 weeks. If they are required to go back to the office, they have to do test kit. They have to make sure that they report to the employers all their sensitive data and what they have done, etc., where they have gone to for the past 14 days. So I would say during this COVID situation, greater pressure definitely has been put on companies, whether you are logistic companies or any other companies. So there are greater pressure now. And in terms of contractual obligations, this is also one of the very popular issues or dispute that I came across. So a lot of contractors or clients will come to me and ask me, you know, I have this goods being delayed in other countries, and then how I'm going to enforce the contract because of this COVID situation, and I do not know how to terminate it. Should I terminate it or not? So we have to look into the contract, whether there is any force majeure clause. So it has to be expressly stated. And then how parties can mitigate the situation, whether you have a frustration clause, whether there's any remedy to the frustration. I wouldn't advise clients to terminate the contract if it's because of COVID, because this is something that is unforeseeable and uncontrollable. So parties should look at amendments or extension of the contract or the performance of the contract rather than terminating it. Not just that, because a lot of cross-border contracts also involved in this because of the different countries. So they have to look at the laws in their respective countries, and also whether there's any arbitration clause, any jurisdictional clause that governs the performance of the contract. So there are a lot more regulations or even legal implications during this COVID or during this pandemic. And we lawyers will just try our very best to help our client to mitigate, to overcome any legal disputes, or maybe they can mitigate the situation by any compliance issues or any regulations that we can help them with. So we lawyers will try to, avoid going to court and then just help them, because court is an issue now. We can't even get clients flying over to Malaysia to attend courts. But our Malaysian court accepted virtual or video call proceedings. So that's in a way mitigate the situation if the parties decided to go to court proceedings. But in any event, we will definitely help our client to relook into the contracts and then go through the terms and then advise them accordingly as to how to perform their obligations without the need to go to court. We are trying to achieve a win-win situation over here. Thanks, Franchet.
Thank you, Esther. May I ask a follow-up question? You mentioned an increase in disputes relating to contract supply. Have you also seen an increase in disputes relating to intellectual property or labor compliance?
Yes, we have intellectual property disputes quite a bit during this time. A lot of them involve online disputes. So, for example, copyright dispute and trademark dispute, because of the, everything from offline to online. So a lot of brands are being exposed online, and it just opened up to so many different types of exploitation online. We have received inquiry, for example, there was some infringement on online shopping platform. They would like to know how to go about this platform in taking down the brands or exploiting their brands without the authority, etc. So we have been receiving a lot of queries on all this. So we can see by putting everything online, there are pros and cons. The pro will be to expedite everything. For example, that's what Ivan and Zach say. Digitalization is just expedite the whole thing, make it from the impossible become the possible. But there's also cons in it, which is the dispute. For example, branding, even copyright, patent, design, breach of confidence, or breach of personal data protection. These are the major issues at the moment that we face in Malaysia, and I'm sure across the region as well.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you.
There certainly are many challenges to be overcome, but in the same way, there are opportunities that could benefit the ecosystem, such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP. The RCEP is a free trade agreement among Asia-Pacific nations. I would like to address this question to Zach. How do you think the RCEP will create opportunities for logistics companies like Ninja Van in Singapore and in the region?
Well, right now, we do not have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So for now, this is not going to happen. But fortunately, we have the ASEAN countries with Japan, China, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. They have signed the RCEP. And it's a bit special. So the RCEP is one of the, probably the first, if not one of the first, multilateral treaty that actually touches quite a bit on e-commerce and digital trading and digital processes. So far, right now, it has been ratified by Japan, China, and Singapore. So hopefully, it will be ratified by all the other signing countries. So a few key points in the RCEP that maybe I want to talk about. One is that the ratified countries must acknowledge the validity of e-signature. So how does this help in terms of transaction? Well, right now we have COVID-19 pandemic. It's more difficult for people to go out and collect wet ink signatures. It's difficult for you to mail wet ink signatures because logistics is a bit more challenging nowadays. So if you are going to have electronic signatures that are valid and by way of either statute or government recognition and say it's valid, I think it's going to improve confidence among business and also consumers to actually use e-signature and treat that as a norm. And this will essentially mean that deals are closed a lot faster. And the other thing which is also quite interesting is that the RCEP also has provisions to the effect to deter or rather to prevent countries from implementing data localization regulations. Data localization regulations essentially just adds on business costs unnecessarily to regional companies. I mean, I will not name who, but probably Ninja Van, other logistics players will also be affected. So with reduction of costs, and all these savings can be invested into better quality services, digital processes, to actually improve the process flow for consumers and for the shippers. And the other key part is also that electronic documents for trading will be accepted. How is this important? So if, let's say, all the RCEP signatory countries actually has laws and regulations that makes it very clear that electronic documents are accepted, they're accepted for statutory filing purposes, they are accepted for submission for customs, etc., along with e-signature. This is going to mean that to clear customs for your goods is going to be reduced from maybe days to just hours. So all this means is that we have greater supply chain certainty, we have reduced costs, and it's just going to benefit shippers and both consumers and businesses that are waiting to receive their goods. And RCEP also have requirements that countries must put in place personal data regulations. And I'll talk about that a bit later on as to why that is very important. And maybe one point is to explain a bit more about how RCEP may really move along e-commerce. But I think when we take a look at what's happening in the current world right now, and especially when we see the upswing in e-commerce, we probably realize that with or without any multilateral treaty, we expect entrepreneurs to be enterprising, and we can expect businesses to grow their businesses. And e-commerce is on the upswing right now, even without the regulations. But does it mean that we shouldn't have all these regulations, or because enterprises will continue to do what they are good at? Well, at the end of the day, the way I see it is that it is important that we have all these regulations to be put in place to facilitate e-commerce in the signatory countries, because it will reduce transaction costs. It will improve efficiency in terms of clearing customs. And all this, what it means is that there can be savings in terms of time, in terms of cost to consumers. And this is something that we shouldn't, we should appreciate, and we should actually try to strive for. And with regards to what sort of regulations is going to be very important in order to really facilitate e-commerce, and which is now not really an issue in Southeast Asia, is with regards to privacy and personal data. I think awareness for privacy and personal data is not so high in Southeast Asia compared to other countries outside Asia. But I think more and more, especially when we hear of more instances of data leaks, the awareness about potential impact to individuals when it comes to data leak, when it comes to the personal data being disclosed on the dark web, etc., consumers in Southeast Asia are going to be more demanding in terms of how their personal data is going to be protected. Not all Southeast Asia countries have personal data privacy regulations, and it is good to actually for the Southeast Asia countries to have such regulations in place, because it will improve consumer confidence. Because consumer confidence is going to be very important in terms of whether they are willing to go onto the app, to go onto the internet on their mobile devices, and to actually start carrying out business transactions online, to start signing contracts online, and also to start giving their personal, financial, or other data online. So maybe what some of the Southeast Asia countries could look at is perhaps when it comes to more robust kind of framework in terms of dealing with data leaks. Because that is really when consumers are really affected, when their personal data, which may also include credit card details, that are being leaked on the World Wide Web. So if there are more robust regulations in terms of managing and dealing with data leaks, that will actually really help to improve consumer confidence. And another thing, which is something that maybe is not so common around the world yet, is maybe regulators should also think about potential coattail kind of civil action to follow in the event that a data leak has been presumed or established. Because in some cases, in some limited cases, the data leak may include unauthorized disclosure of personal data that are sensitive, for example, in credit card details. And this may be misused, and individuals will actually suffer losses. It may not be so easy to go and stop the credit card from being misused very quickly by notifying the bank. So perhaps certain kind of protection or rights should be given to consumers. At the end of the day, this may seem like business cost to a lot of the players in the e-commerce market, but if we have this kind of regulations, it actually improves in consumers' confidence in carrying out transactions online, and it's just going to mean that overall, in the long run, there will be an upswing for everyone in the e-commerce market. Thanks a lot, Francesca.
Thank you, Zach. Esther, what other laws do you think should be in place, or do you think that most of what the government should be regulating have already been covered by existing implementing rules or statutes?
In terms of Malaysia, I'm trying to confine to Malaysia first, that the government has made quite a lot of policy changes or regulation changes for the past 18 months. So, for example, they have lowered the interest, so they have amended the Financial Act. They have also come up with a new act, a temporary measures COVID Act, that deals with contractual obligations and personal debt. For example, they have increased the threshold for bankruptcy. So because there's a lot of, inability to pay debts by individuals because of loss of jobs, or they are being cut off their salary or being deducted, so they are unable to meet their monthly expenses or commitments. So the bank actually allowed deferment or moratorium to delay the payments or reduce the interest rates. So they have also amended the law, for example, on Currency Act and any other. So they also changes the Personal Data Protection Act that allows the employers to keep record of the sensitive data. So they have changed that, because before that, you have to be very, very strict in how you protect or how you collect the sensitive data, and then how do you keep them and what is the purpose. But I think during the COVID, everybody knows what is the purpose of the sensitive data, to be kept by the employers or the owners of the shops, etc. So they have changed that. In terms of employment law in Malaysia, there were actually amendments, but it was not, due to the COVID, it was unable to table in the parliament yet. But there were a lot of amendments to the Employment Act as well. It's just that due to the COVID, the whole tabling of the bill has been postponed. In terms of the rest of the regulations, I think what Zach has mentioned earlier, that those countries that doesn't have personal data rights, they should start looking at it, because it definitely gained confidence and to the consumers and also the owners, the brand owners, and also not just that. IP rights are also very important. Maybe the IP, the relevant ministry have to look at the laws on how to protect intellectual property owners, because when the rights or the IP is being exposed online, how are they going to protect it? And then what is their recourse in the event there is any exploitation? Because it takes very, very long period of time to conduct R&D, and then the moment you put online, everything is exposed. And you have no recourse towards your, against another infringer, and then it is really frustration. It frustrates the owner that because they do not know what to do, they do not have any laws to protect their rights. So it's important for the ministry to look at the relevant policies and come up with the proper framework as to how to protect the brand owners in terms of IP rights, as well as I mentioned earlier, the personal, the data protection, as well as the privacy of individuals. Thanks, Franchette.
Thank you, Esther. COVID has been probably the largest disruptor of our time, but there are other factors that we may have to look into that would impact the supply chain significantly. Ivan, perhaps you could discuss this for us. Aside from COVID-19, what other factors or developments do you expect would influence supply chains across Asia or globally in the next few years? There's been a lot of talk or expectation regarding relocation of manufacturers or factories. Has this in fact happened?
Yeah, sure. Let's look at some of the facts that's happening recently, right? I think as we all know, recently the U.S. Vice President actually visited Southeast Asia, right? The two countries that she visited is basically Singapore and Vietnam. And one of the things that was discussed was about supply chain. So this is quite surprising because usually the political leader, when they visit, they do not discuss about supply chain issue. But this has become so serious that, in fact, the President of the United States has issued an executive order on the 24th of February, calling for the whole of government to actually look into how to boost the resilience in this supply chain. So we are seeing the trends whereby many countries, they are starting to implement what we call China Plus, okay, whereby a lot of we see a lot of high-tech companies, they are also exploring Southeast Asia, as one of the potential locations for to build a new manufacturing plant. So that in fact is already happening. I think as we mentioned, many companies, they need to look for options. They need to balance between all the whatever political issues, right? So this will definitely create a big impact to the economies, and in fact a big changes to the future of the economies. Let me give us a very good example of what happened in the past, right? I mean, I remember in the year 2007, when the world started to implement the new smartphone, the full touchscreen smartphone. From then until today, you can see that there's a very, very huge percentage of handphones today that are actually made in China, including the top brands, right? Because a lot of those, they actually build their factory in China. So over the years, you will see that, China has also become one of the powerhouse for smartphone. So what is the reason that China is able to grow so fast with the smartphone? And one of the main reasons is because, when these mainstream player actually, or the high-tech company actually build the supply chains in certain country, the country is able to build out on the supply chain capability. So when they build out the capability, they are able to do it on their own. So today you can see that there are many strong smartphone companies that come out, that emerge from the market. If you look at it, I remember in last year, third quarter, the top leader for smartphone volume is a China company. And in fact, this year, as you look at it now, the top three, there will always be some the midst of the US, the China brand, right? So these are one of the things that, when the decision to move the supply chain to whichever country will have a huge impact on the economy, because, you can see that many countries, they have the big potential. They have a huge manpower, especially during this COVID period, which country which has a space to build the factory, that has the manpower, they have the right digital directions. Basically these are the countries that is able to benefit a lot from these relocations, right? And it's not just relocation. It's just spreading, the supply chains into, like I mentioned, multi-path, multi-source. You see, so you will no longer rely on a single source. So to me, this will be one of the key reasons. Basically, the business continuity, to ensure that you do not depend on a single country, you do not depend on a single procurement, a single suppliers. This will be the key reasons to drive a lot of high-tech enterprise to basically, to build up so-called, I mentioned the China Plus strategy, especially in Southeast Asia. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Esther, is there anything you wanted to add about the digital signatures and any risks and mitigation that users of the digital software for signatures should be aware of?
Yes, I just want to add on a little bit on this. In Malaysia, we do have Digital Signature Act. However, the challenge that we have will be, people who are elderly, they do not have access to internet, and they do not know what is the meaning of digital signature. So because they are still used like the thumbprint, etc. And then during this COVID time, it's just not possible to get thumbprint. And then digital signature, there's one challenge which is the witness. Sometimes in certain transactions, you need to witness the signature. One of which you can, overcome by way of virtual witnessing, by having your client at the end and then you are at one end to witness the client signing. But again, that is not digital signature, that is wet ink as well. When it comes to digital signature, another challenge will be, how do I know that this person is signing this document and this signature belongs to this person? So of course there are ways to combat this kind of challenges. One of the ways will be by way of encryption. When you have a document being sent to a specific person, you encrypt it by way of signature, etc., and then you decrypt it at the other end. So that's one way that perhaps the companies or that can be acceptable, by companies when it comes to digital signature, and then the relevant laws will have to acknowledge and accept this kind of arrangement or digital signature transaction. Yeah. So I just want to add on that note.
Thank you, Esther. We have a few minutes for a question and answer, and there is a question addressed to you, Esther. Would you advocate mediation as the way forward to manage and resolve disputes during this time? Instead of going to court, as you mentioned, there's some logistical issues for parties to going to the court these days.
Definitely. Mediation, arbitration is the way forward. Although lawyer will try to, litigate the matter in court, but during this period, we always encourage clients to go for mediation. In fact, Malaysia has set up a mediation center just for COVID any transactions or disputes happen during the COVID during the pandemic, so that mediation can go through even faster than the normal mediation that is held in a civil court, etc. So we have a specific mediation center that deals with transaction disputes as a result of the pandemic. So perhaps the threshold will be lower, and then the parties will be more receptive to settlement terms, instead of being harsh on the terms and being adamant to proceed with court. So the mediator will try their very best to mediate the matter and then come to a settlement term that is acceptable by both parties. So yes, I definitely advise clients to go for mediation. Only if all fails, then we have no choice but to go to the civil court.
Thank you, Esther. I have a question for Ivan and Zach. Assuming that the RCEP is ratified by the relevant country, what regulations or structure do you implement them? What regulations or structures do you think should be enforced to implement the RCEP?
Would you like to go first? Or
I'll go first.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, I think with regards to personal data protection obligations and personal data protection rights, these are probably one of the most important things that regulations need to address. With regards to e-signatures, digital documentation, etc., a lot of them can actually be solved by the current background laws across Southeast Asia, which is why transactions are going on right now. We see e-commerce companies going on the upswing. But personal data protection and privacy rights, they are usually not rights or legal obligations that already exist in the background laws in a lot of Southeast Asia countries. So what this means is that legislation needs to directly intervene in order to create the protective environment for people to have confidence to proceed online and carry out transactions. So I think this is probably one of the most important things amongst all the various kind of rights or regulations that the legislation need to address in the RCEP participating countries. Thanks a lot, Franchet.
Thank you.
Okay, so coming from me, as I mentioned earlier, from a high-tech company, I think the regulation will, for me, definitely focus more on two areas. One is the data protection, and one is the AI ethics, as I mentioned earlier. Because I do believe that when company embrace on digital transformation, there's also going to be a lot of questions asked by the customers on how well can we trust this journey, this AI data, In fact, if you look at it today, I believe in countries like Singapore, there's many data all over the place. Every car on the road, on the street, it has a camera. There's data inside. How do we convert this data into information that's useful for the enterprise to derive some decision making based on this data? So for me, I definitely believe that we need to have a more framework regulatory on how this data can be used. How this data can be analyzed and how this AI can be trained.
Earlier, Ivan, you mentioned that many enterprises are moving towards digital transformation as a means to improve their operations. What are some of the technology that they should explore?
Well, I think the new normal created by COVID will definitely create a couple of trends. First of all, I think there's going to be a lot more dependency on high-speed internet, be it 5G or whether it's a Wi-Fi, for remote working as well as for remote education. Secondly, there will be a faster adoption of cloud, because cloud is going to help the enterprise to create affordable, automation and also scalable IT. Next, we talk about AI. AI is the source whereby it helps to make a lot of decisions and to resource the manpower, and of course, IoT devices, right? So, as for what we observe, the forefronter enterprise are usually the ones that looking to enhance the user experience. So they will likely shift their, investment into areas like 5G, IoT, AI, as well as big data. The objective is to create a smarter and more innovative economies, right? So, and of course, IoT will create contactless experiment, which is very important today. So the use of technology like e-commerce, drones, robots, wearable, for example, I do know of a company that whereby, they have a lot of workers, when the things happen whereby a lot of workers has got COVID, they actually let the workers wear the wearable whereby, they are able to trace the exact location of them, and the temperature and things like that. So you can expect that these are all the technologies that we're going to see a lot more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. So as we come to a close, we end with Esther, Ivan, and Zach sharing with us, just very briefly, best practices and lessons learned from COVID-19.
I think in terms of the legal perspective, it is important for companies now to relook into their company policies and also the respective contracts with their counterparts, whether there's any clause that need to be amended or expressly included into the contracts. And then they have to start looking into digitalization, because everything is now moving from offline to online. So they have to put resources and they have to gain knowledge on how to deal with all this thing online. For example, you have to submit documents via certain platform. they may not be familiar with, for example, tender submission online. So they will need to start looking on it and then put more resources into digital platform or digital devices in order to help them to sustain their business. And on top of that, they have to start looking on their IP rights as well, whether there's any rights that they own, and look into their contracts, how to protect their own rights, for example, the licensing, the terms of the licensing, the exclusivity, etc. So they have to start looking on all these agreements to come up with a framework or policy that will benefit them and help them to sustain their company in the longer run. Thank you, Francette.
Thank you, Esther. Ivan?
Yeah, I think, again, coming from a high-tech company, right, I think the future looking enterprise, they should focus on building out their digital capabilities in the key areas, with the digital agenda as the forefront of their recovery plan. Enterprise, they need to build a strong business continuity plan that focus on the end-to-end, which include technology, people, and the process. I think many firms now realize that you can't buy digital transformation. You need to invest. You need to invest in the technology and in the people, and let the people be the one to drive the transformation within the organization. With COVID, there's going to be changes. The jobs will evolve. Some of the jobs will be gone. New jobs will be created. You need to invest in the people to make sure that they are willing to move forward with the changes. The people are the real driver for the changes, not the technology, right? So last but not least, I just want to also say that I hope when enterprise roll out this digital transformation, they need to ensure that it's a safe and stable operation, because we have seen a lot of cases. In fact, the cases of all the hackers, all the ransomware has increased significantly. So I just urge all the organizations to take special consideration into building a safe and stable, transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. And Zach, any last words?
Well, my point is a very simple one. Because of COVID-19, your most reliable contractors and suppliers can become unavailable. So double or triple your pool of contractors and suppliers so that your supply chain is resilient. Thank you, Francette.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Esther, Ivan, and Zach, for your time and for sharing with us your knowledge and expertise. Have a good day and stay safe, everyone.
What amazing discussions we have had this morning. A lot of valuable insights coming from our esteemed panels. Now it's time for us to have a quick break, but we do encourage everyone to join the breakout discussion while you are eating your lunch at your desks. As I mentioned earlier, there are 5 breakout topics you can choose from. Please pick the topic that is relevant to your industry or your area of interest and expertise. Simply click the breakout room for the topic of your choice to join the discussion. And after the discussion, please go back to the main summit room to join the afternoon sessions of the summit. The discussion topics are in breakout room number 1, EdTech in ASEAN. This will be moderated by partner and head of education practice group, RHT Law Asia, Young Yu Jin. Investment Outlook in Cambodia, be moderated by partner, foreign lawyer, RHT Law Asia, Mr. Liao Yi Kai. Doing business between China and ASEAN, moderated by partner, foreign lawyer, RHT Law Asia, Miss Amanda Chen. ESG in ASEAN, moderated by senior consultants, RHT Green, Miss Celia Chua, and Mr. Lim Jin Han. Digital assets, the new normal or just another fad, be moderated by the CEO of RHT Aldigi Financial Holdings, Mr. J. Jayaprakash, and the Director of RHT Digi Capital, Mr. Go Seng T.